The Lancaster estate lay in silence, a sprawling mansion set against the Boston winter night. Snow fell thick outside the tall windows, the storm wrapping the house in a cocoon of white and shadow. Inside, Alexander Lancaster sat motionless in his wheelchair near the fireplace, the flames reflecting off the sharp angles of his face. He had once been the symbol of power and ambition, a man who built towers that touched the sky. Now he was reduced to a solitary figure in a silent hall. His body broken, his will even more fractured. The clock struck 10. The heavy oak doors creaked open. He did not turn his head, though he knew who entered. His new nurse had arrived, hired after a line of others had failed. He had made each of them quit with his cruelty, his silence, or his refusal to cooperate. In his mind, this one would be no different. Her footsteps echoed softly as she crossed the marble floor. Rachel Moore, 27, stood by the edge of the firelight. She was not dressed in polished designer wear like the women he had once entertained, but in the simple uniform of her profession. Her auburn hair was tied back in a messy knot, her eyes a steady hazel that seemed too calm for someone stepping into the lair of a broken billionaire. Alexander did not look at her directly. He spoke with a voice low and sharp. "Another caretaker sent to babysit me." Rachel met his words without hesitation. "No, I am someone who knows how to keep a man alive when he is trying too hard to die." His hand gripped the arm of the wheelchair. Most nurses had lowered their eyes, softened their tone, or pretended pity. This one did neither. She did not glance at the useless legs covered by a dark blanket. She looked at his eyes as if measuring the man beneath the scars of his accident. The fire cracked loudly between them, but neither moved. For the first time in months, Alexander felt something other than numbness. It was not comfort. It was irritation, yes, but also a faint spark of intrigue. He studied her further. Her hands were small but firm, the kind that had held patience through sleepless nights. Her cheeks were touched with the red flush of the winter cold. She smelled faintly of antiseptic and something warmer, perhaps lavender soap. She did not flinch beneath his gaze. Rachel placed a leather bag on the side table. "Your mother signed the contract. I will be staying here full-time?" "Full-time." His lips curved in a humorless smile. He had heard that before. None had lasted more than a week. He wheeled closer, his eyes narrowing. "You will not last 3 days." Rachel tilted her chin slightly, her voice quiet but firm. "Then we shall see who lasts longer." For a moment, the silence of the mansion shifted. The snow outside pressed against the glass, the fire whispered low, and in the dim light, 2 strangers stood at the edge of something neither expected. A man who had chosen to stop living, and a woman who could not afford to stop fighting. Alexander turned his wheelchair back toward the window, dismissing her. Yet even as he did, his mind lingered on her words. There was no softness in them, no false kindness, only defiance. Rachel stepped closer to the fire, her shadow falling across the marble floor. She spoke once more before retiring for the night. "If you want me gone, you will have to try harder than silence." He did not reply, but when the door closed behind her, he found himself whispering into the stillness, "She will not last 3 days." And yet in the depths of his chest, something stirred. Rachel did not sleep well, her first night in the Lancaster estate. The halls were too silent, the air too heavy with secrets, and every shadow seemed to stretch unnaturally long across the marble floors. She woke before dawn, dressed simply. and walked toward the kitchen, only to find it already brimming with staff, who moved quickly but never spoke. Their eyes slid away from hers, as if instructed not to acknowledge her presence. When she asked for a tray to bring upstairs, the housekeeper, Mrs. Callahan, gave her a tight smile and said, "The master does not eat in the mornings." Rachel pressed her lips together and carried a tray anyway. She entered the study where Alexander sat by the window, his jaw tight, his gaze lost in the snow that blanketed the garden. She set the tray down on the low table, poured him black coffee, and placed a plate of toast beside it. He did not look at her. "I said I do not eat in the mornings." His tone was clipped dismissive, a blade against the silence. Rachel pulled out a chair, sat down, and took a piece of toast for herself. "Then I suppose I will eat it." She bit into the toast, the crunch startlingly loud in the still room. Alexander finally turned his head. "You are supposed to serve, not share." Rachel met his cold stare calmly. "If you want me to treat you like a patient who cannot lift a fork, you hired the wrong nurse. If you want me to treat you like a man, then sit and eat." His brows furrowed. No one had spoken to him like this since the accident. He clenched his jaw, said nothing, and wheeled himself away. But not before his eyes betrayed a flicker of something he quickly buried. Later that afternoon came the first round of physical therapy. Rachel met him in the private gym, the air filled with the scent of polished wood and antiseptic. Alexander was already there, his arms crossed his wheelchair, positioned stubbornly, away from the exercise equipment. "I do not do this anymore," he muttered, refusing to meet her eyes. Rachel walked to the rack, picked up a resistance band, and knelt in front of him. She placed the band gently in his hands. "You are not broken, you are healing." He laughed harsh and bitter. "Healing. Look at me. I am nothing but a man in a chair waiting to be buried." Rachel's voice lowered, steady as stone. "Then let me be the one who proves you wrong." She guided his hands into the band, helped him stretch against the resistance. He fought her, pulled away, cursed under his breath. The band slipped, snapping against his wrist, leaving a red mark. He threw it across the room. Enough. His chest heaved, his eyes burned with fury. Rachel picked up the band, returned it to his lap, and said quietly, "I am not here to pity you, Mr. Lancaster. I am here to make sure you do not rot away in this mansion while your enemies wait to dance on your grave." His glare faltered, caught between anger and reluctant recognition. She stood, smoothed her uniform, and walked toward the door. "You will thank me one day, though I do not expect it will be soon." That night the storm outside knocked out the power. The estate was thrown into shadows. The chandeliers extinguished, the hum of machines silenced. Rachel lit a candle and moved through the halls, checking on the staff. When she reached Alexander's room, she found him awake, his face pale in the dim glow of the fire. She set the candle on the mantel and noticed the thin blanket on his lap. Without a word, she unfolded a heavy quilt and draped it across his shoulders. His fingers twitched, and before she could step back, he caught her wrist. His grip was surprisingly strong. "Stay." His voice was barely a whisper, threaded with exhaustion, loneliness, and something rawer that he himself seemed afraid to name. "Just tonight." Rachel hesitated. She could feel the weight of his hand on her skin, the silent plea beneath his guarded exterior. Finally, she pulled a chair closer and sat beside his bed. She did not touch him again, did not speak. She simply sat, her presence a quiet anchor in the storm. Alexander's eyes closed, though his grip lingered until sleep claimed him. For the first time since she had entered his world, Rachel saw the man beneath the armor of bitterness, and for the first time in months, Alexander slept without nightmares. The morning after the storm, the mansion glistened with frost, every window pane etched in delicate patterns of ice. Rachel moved quietly through the corridors, carrying a tray of breakfast. She pushed open the study door and found Alexander already awake, his wheelchair positioned near the grand piano that stood untouched in the corner. His hands hovered above the keys but did not press down. When he noticed her, he withdrew them quickly, his face hardening. "I did not ask for food," he muttered. Rachel set the tray down without comment, then sat in the chair opposite him and lifted a piece of fruit for herself. "If you refuse to eat, at least watch someone who enjoys being alive." His eyes flickered toward her irritation, shadowing his features. "You mistake stubbornness for enjoyment." She bit into an apple chewed and smiled faintly. "And you mistake giving up for dignity." For the first time, his lips curved into something that almost resembled a smirk. Later, during therapy, Alexander resisted again. Rachel placed the resistance band in his hands, adjusted his posture, and when he struggled, she laid her hand over his. His muscles tensed beneath her touch, his breath catching for a fraction of a second. She did not remove her hand until he completed the exercise. When he dropped the band, his voice was low and sharp. "Do not touch me like I am fragile." Rachel leaned close, her hazel eyes steady on his. "Then stop acting like glass." Their proximity lingered longer than either intended. The silence stretched, filled with an energy neither could define. She stepped back, her pulse quickening while he turned his face away, to hide the way his chest rose and fell. That evening, Rachel entered his room to change his bandages. He sat bare-chested, the scar from his accident slashing down one side of his ribs. She carried the basin of warm water and a clean cloth. But when she knelt beside him, her hands trembled slightly. He watched her silently, his gaze heavy, his jaw tense. She pressed the cloth gently against his skin, the heat of the water mingling with the heat of his body. He inhaled sharply, not from pain, but from the intimacy of the moment. Rachel bit her lip, focusing on the task though her cheeks flushed. When she finished and reached for his shirt, he caught her wrist. "Do you look away because you pity me, or because you feel something you cannot admit?" Her breath stilled. She pulled her hand free and stood quickly. "You should rest." She left the room without another word, her footsteps echoing down the hall. Alone, Alexander leaned back in his chair, a strange ache spreading through him. It was not physical. It was something he had not felt since before the accident, something dangerous and alive. Days passed with a new rhythm. They shared meals not as master and servant, but as two people forced into the same silence. Rachel began reading aloud, from books in the library, her voice filling the cavernous rooms with warmth. Alexander listened from his chair, pretending disinterest, though he memorized the cadence of her tone. One evening she sat by the fireplace, reading poetry, while he pretended to focus on his glass of brandy. When she finished, she glanced up and caught him watching her. Their eyes locked the fire, casting golden light between them. Neither spoke. Neither needed to. On another day, she coaxed him to the piano. She placed his hands gently on the keys and pressed a single note. The sound echoed soft and haunting. "Play," she urged. He shook his head, but she pressed again, her hand over his. Together they produced a broken chord. It was imperfect, but in that imperfection he felt the echo of who he once was. Their hands lingered longer than necessary. Her heart raced, her breath shallow. She withdrew, finally retreating to the safety of distance. That night, Rachel lay awake in her room, staring at the ceiling. She remembered the heat of his skin under her hands, the weight of his gaze, the sound of that fragile chord. She told herself she could not let this happen. He was her patient, her employer, a man broken in ways she could not fix. And yet when she closed her eyes, she saw only him. Across the hall, Alexander sat awake as well. His fingers tapped against the arm of his chair, recalling the rhythm of the piano, the warmth of her presence beside him. He whispered into the darkness, "Why can I not look away?" The days continued with a fragile rhythm, an unspoken truce between two lives forced into proximity. Yet as the snow melted outside and the Boston air grew crisp, shadows of the past began to slip into the halls of Lancaster Estate. One afternoon, Rachel descended the staircase after checking on Alexander's schedule of therapy, her steps measured and quiet. At the base of the stairs stood a tall woman dressed in an elegant crimson coat, her blonde hair coiled into a perfect twist. Her perfume drifted like smoke, expensive and cloying. The woman's gaze swept over Rachel with open disdain. "You must be the nurse," she said smoothly. Rachel nodded, her voice steady. "And you are Veronica Hale." The name fell from Rachel's lips like a memory she had never owned. She had read it in the papers, once the darling of Boston high society. Once Alexander's fiancée before the accident, shattered more than bones. Veronica's lips curled. "I see he keeps company with charity cases now." Without waiting for a reply, she brushed past Rachel and moved up the stairs, her heels striking the marble like gunshots. Rachel's chest tightened, though she forced herself to breathe evenly. She told herself it did not matter, but when she reached the kitchen, her hands trembled as she poured a cup of tea. Upstairs, Alexander was already waiting in the drawing room, his posture rigid, his face unreadable. When Veronica entered, his eyes flickered with something bitter. "Veronica," he said flatly, "I was not expecting you." She smiled, poised and graceful. "You never did expect me, Alex. Not when I left, and not now." She moved closer, her voice dropping. "I never stopped loving you." Rachel, who had come to deliver his medication, froze at the doorway. The words pierced sharper than they should have. She turned quickly, leaving the tray on a side table, but not before Alexander caught sight of her retreating figure. He frowned, his jaw tightening, though he said nothing as Veronica reached for his hand. He pulled away, wheeled back sharply, and said in a cold tone, "You stopped the moment you walked out of that hospital room. Do not pretend otherwise." Veronica's face faltered for the first time, but she recovered quickly, her voice dripping with practiced charm. "I was scared. You had changed. I thought you did not want me anymore." Alexander's laugh was harsh, humorless. "No, you were scared because I could no longer walk red carpets with you. You loved the image, not the man." Her cheeks flushed, but her eyes hardened. "I still see the man I loved. And perhaps with the right influence, you can be him again." His hands clenched on the wheels of his chair. "I do not need your influence." He turned sharply toward the window, dismissing her with silence. Veronica lingered, her gaze darting toward the door where Rachel had vanished. Then she leaned closer, her whisper a blade. Do not mistake pity for love, Alex. Nurses get paid to care. He did not answer, but the words stung in the quiet of his mind. Later that evening, Rachel found herself alone in the library. She opened a folder left carelessly on the desk, a maintenance report regarding Alexander's car. Her eyes scanned the details, her pulse quickening. The brakes had been replaced 5 days before the crash. No issues were noted, yet the driver roster showed a sudden change. A substitute driver with no forwarding address. Rachel's hand shook as she traced the lines. This was not negligence, this was deliberate. She pressed the folder shut, her chest pounding. She walked to the balcony for air, the cold wind biting against her cheeks. Below, the city lights shimmered, but all she could see was the image of Alexander in that chair, a victim of betrayal deeper than he imagined. She whispered into the night, this was not an accident. At that same moment, Alexander sat alone in his study, Veronica's perfume still clinging to the room. He stared at the untouched glass of whiskey before him, hearing her words repeat like poison. Nurses get paid to care. His mind shifted to Rachel, to her steady eyes, her firm voice, her refusal to cower. He remembered the warmth of her hand guiding his, the stubbornness in her tone when she told him he was healing. He exhaled, sharply torn between doubt and the strange pull that refused to loosen its hold. In the darkness of the hall, Rachel returned, folder in hand. Determination burning beneath her calm exterior, she knew what she had found would change everything. She also knew Alexander might not be ready to hear it, but she could not remain silent. She stepped into the study doorway, her silhouette framed by candlelight. He looked up, his eyes shadowed. "What is it?" She tightened her grip on the folder. "The truth," she said quietly. "And it will break what is left of you." His gaze held hers hard and unyielding. Though deep inside, he feared she might be right. Rachel stood frozen in the study doorway, her fingers tightening on the folder until the edges bent beneath her grip. Alexander's gaze narrowed, suspicion and weariness lining his face. She stepped forward and placed the folder on the desk before him. "I found this in the library," she said quietly. "You should see it." He hesitated, then flipped the file open. His eyes scanned the maintenance report, the note about the replacement driver, the sudden disappearance. His hand stilled halfway down the page. For a long moment he said nothing, but the silence thickened until Rachel finally broke it. "This was no accident. Someone tampered with your car. Someone wanted you gone." Alexander's jaw clenched, his knuckles white as he gripped the armrest of his chair. "Stop," he muttered. "You don't know what you're talking about." Rachel's voice rose steadier than she felt. "I know enough. You didn't just lose your legs that night, Alexander. You lost your will to fight because they wanted you broken." His head snapped up, eyes blazing. "Do not pretend you understand me. You don't know what it is to wake up in a twisted wreck, blood pooling around you, your own brother dead beside you. You don't know what it is to be pitied by the world that once bowed to you." She flinched at the rawness in his voice, but she did not retreat. "No, I don't. But I know what it feels like to be discarded, to be told you are less than nothing. And I refuse to let you throw yourself away when I can see you are still alive." His chest rose and fell in harsh rhythm. He wanted to scream again, to push her away with every cruel word he could muster, but her calm defiance pinned him in place. He wheeled himself abruptly toward the fire, turning his back. "Leave me." Rachel's throat tightened. but she did not move. "If you want me gone, you will have to try harder than anger," she said softly. She turned and walked out, leaving the scent of lavender and defiance lingering in the room. Alone, Alexander pressed a hand over his face. His mind replayed the moment his car had spun out of control, the sound of metal shattering his brother's last scream. He had buried the suspicion long ago, locked it behind silence, but now it clawed back with sharp teeth. That night, Rachel stood on the balcony outside her room, her arms wrapped around herself. The city lights shimmered below, cold and distant. She thought of his eyes when she confronted him, the fury, the pain. She had touched something deeper than scars. She had touched the wound no one else dared to see. Tears pricked her eyes unbidden. She brushed them away angrily. She had promised herself she would not fall for him. He was a patient, a billionaire, a man surrounded by walls she had no place tearing down. And yet every moment with him pulled her closer to a fire she could not resist. She did not hear the soft hum of wheels until a heavy coat settled over her shoulders. Startled, she turned to find Alexander behind her. His face was unreadable, but his eyes were softer than she had ever seen. "You'll freeze out here," he said simply. She swallowed, clutching the coat tighter. "I've endured worse." His lips twitched faintly, almost a smile, but the weariness in his expression dimmed it. He leaned closer, his voice low. "Why do you care?" Rachel met his gaze, her own steady. "Because you are not just scars and bitterness, you are still here. And that means something." His throat worked as if words stuck there, unable to be spoken. For a moment, the air between them hummed with something neither dared name. Then he wheeled himself back toward the hall, leaving her with the coat heavy on her shoulders and her heart heavier still. Later that night, Alexander returned to his room. He sat in silence, staring at his legs, the faint tremor of muscles he had begun to notice but refused to believe in. Slowly, he placed his hands on the armrests pressed down and forced his body upward. His calves quivered, his thighs burned, and for a brief, glorious second, he rose from the chair. He collapsed almost immediately, sweat dripping down his face, breath ragged. But as he sank back, a strange smile tugged at his lips. For the first time in months, he felt alive. No one saw. Not Rachel, not the staff, only the night bore witness. And when he lay in bed, muscles throbbing, he whispered into the dark, "Maybe she is right. Maybe I am not finished." The following days carried a new tension in the Lancaster estate, one that neither Alexander nor Rachel openly acknowledged. Therapy sessions became sharper, longer, filled with clashes that left both of them breathless. When Rachel demanded more effort, Alexander snarled that he was not a soldier to be drilled. When Alexander refused to complete a stretch, Rachel stood her ground until his pride forced him to obey. Yet beneath the anger lived something else, a rhythm that bound them closer. One morning, Rachel walked into the gym to find him already working the resistance bands without being asked. She stood quietly watching the veins tighten on his forearms, the sweat dampening his shirt. He noticed her and scowled. "Do not stare as if I am a circus act." She stepped closer, her voice calm, but edged with fire. "I am staring because you are finally choosing to live." His glare faltered, his breath uneven, but he bent back to his exercise. She smiled faintly unseen. That evening brought the Lancaster Corporation Gala, a glittering affair at the Grand Orchid Hotel, where chandeliers burned golden and every guest whispered about Alexander's downfall. Rachel walked at his side in a simple midnight blue gown, her presence quiet but undeniable. Whispers trailed behind her. That must be the nurse. Poor girl. Pity wife. In the ballroom, Veronica Hale made her entrance in silver satin, her smile a weapon aimed at Rachel. She leaned close to Alexander, her perfume cloying. You cannot honestly expect anyone to believe this arrangement. Look at her, Alex. She belongs in the servants' wing, not at your side. Rachel's jaw clenched, her nails biting into her palm. But before she could speak, Alexander pushed his wheelchair back and with deliberate strength placed his palms on the armrests. Gasps erupted as he strained legs trembling and slowly rose to his feet. He stood tall, his posture rigid but unbroken. His voice cut through the ballroom like steel. She is not my arrangement. She is my choice. Silence fell heavy and shocked. Cameras flashed, whispers turned to roars. Rachel stood frozen, her heart thundering, tears stinging her eyes. In that moment, the world saw not the broken billionaire, but the man reclaiming his throne. Later that night, after the chaos of the gala, after reporters swarmed and guests speculated, Rachel returned to the mansion and found Alexander in his study, leaning heavily against his chair, exhaustion etched into his face. She rushed forward. You should not have pushed yourself like that. He caught her hand, his grip firm. I had to, for them to see, for you to see. Her lips parted, her breath faltering. You did not have to prove anything to me. His eyes locked onto hers, dark and burning. Maybe not, but I wanted to. The silence stretched, charged with an electricity neither could deny. He pulled her closer until she stood between his legs, her heart hammering against her ribs. Rachel whispered, "This is wrong. I am your nurse." His thumb brushed the back of her hand. Then stop me. She could not. She leaned down, their lips meeting in a kiss that was not gentle but desperate, months of suppressed emotions spilling out. His hands cupped her face. Hers clung to his shoulders, and the world outside ceased to exist. That night in the sanctuary of his room, they surrendered to the fire that had been building between them. It was not reckless lust, but a collision of pain and healing. His body, scarred and trembling, found strength in her touch. Her heart, burdened with years of silence and sacrifice, found release in his embrace. They moved together, slowly, cautiously, yet with a hunger that deepened with every kiss. Rachel pressed her forehead to his, whispering, "You are alive, Alexander, more alive than you have ever been." His reply was a broken murmur against her skin, "Because of you." In the dim glow of the fire, they gave themselves to each other, not as nurse and patient, not as billionaire and outsider, but as two souls stripped bare of pretense. When dawn crept through the curtains, Rachel lay awake beside him, listening to his steady breathing. For the first time, she felt not like a visitor in this house, but like someone who belonged. Yet as she reached for her phone on the nightstand, a new message appeared, one that froze her blood. It was from an anonymous number, a scan of a letter addressed to Alexander's mother, discussing the change of drivers, the cover-up of the accident, and a plan yet unfinished. Her stomach dropped. She turned to Alexander, still sleeping, his arm draped over her waist. For a moment, she considered waking him, but fear pressed her down. She deleted the message, but the dread remained. The night had bound them, but the shadows had not released their grip. The morning after their night together, the Lancaster mansion seemed different, filled with a fragile warmth that had not existed before. Rachel moved through the halls with a quiet smile, though beneath it lingered unease from the message she had received. She did not tell Alexander not yet. He appeared in the dining room freshly shaven, wearing a crisp black suit, standing with the aid of a cane instead of remaining in his chair. The staff gasped in silence, their eyes widening at the sight of their master on his feet. Rachel felt pride swell in her chest, though fear lingered at the edges. The battle was not over. Later that week, Alexander summoned the board to the Lancaster Corporation headquarters. The marble conference room glistened under the glow of chandeliers, a stark contrast to the tension pressing against every wall. Executives whispered among themselves, their expressions laced with disbelief, as Alexander entered the room upright, his cane striking the floor with steady rhythm. Rachel walked at his side, dressed in a tailored navy dress that spoke of quiet authority. Gasps rippled through the table. The man declared broken had returned not carried by pity, but by sheer will. Alexander's gaze swept the room cold and commanding. "Thank you for coming. Let us begin." He laid out documents one by one, evidence Rachel had helped him uncover, the falsified maintenance logs. The missing driver, the financial transfers, traced back to board members loyal to his uncle. Murmurs erupted, faces paled. One executive rose in protest, but Alexander's voice cut him down. "You paid for silence. You paid for my brother's death. Did you think I would remain in that chair forever, while you feasted on my empire?" His words thundered with authority, long thought lost. Rachel stood behind him, steady and silent, her presence, a reminder that he was not alone. Veronica Hale burst into the room, uninvited, her heels striking the marble with arrogance. She strode to Alexander's side, smiling at the board. "Do not be deceived, gentlemen. This man is not fit to lead. He clings to a nurse, a charity case, and calls it strength. Is that the leader you will follow?" Alexander turned slowly, his cane steady, his eyes burning with ice. "You mistake love for weakness, Veronica. But the truth is, she gave me back my life when everyone else, including you, had written me off." He reached for Rachel's hand, lacing their fingers together before the entire board. Gasps filled the room, cameras clicked, and in that moment he declared not only his power but his heart. Veronica's smile faltered. She hissed under her breath, "You will regret this." Alexander stepped forward, towering, despite the faint tremor in his legs. "No, Veronica. I regret wasting even a second believing you cared for anyone but yourself." He turned back to the board. "Effective immediately, I am reclaiming my position as CEO of Lancaster Holdings. Those involved in the cover-up are dismissed. Security will escort them out." The room erupted into chaos, some shouting protests, others staring in stunned silence. The general counsel gathered the documents quickly, confirming Alexander's claims. One by one, the guilty stood and walked out, their power dissolved. The meeting ended not with applause, but with a stunned quiet that carried more weight than cheers. As the room emptied, Alexander leaned against the table, his breath uneven. Rachel stepped close, her hand brushing his arm. "You did it," she whispered. He looked at her eyes, softening. "No, Rachel, we did it." That evening, back at the mansion, Alexander asked Rachel to meet him in the garden. Lanterns glowed among the roses, casting golden light against the twilight sky. He stood waiting, a small velvet box in his hand. When she reached him, he lowered himself to one knee, his cane discarded beside him. Her breath caught. "Alexander, no. You should not." He looked up at her, his voice firm, despite the tremor in his body. "I will not let anyone say You were forced into my life by contract, by pity, or by circumstance. I choose you every day from this day forward, by choice, not by force, by love. He opened the box to reveal a simple ring, gold and elegant, engraved inside with the words "alive again." Tears filled Rachel's eyes. She dropped to her knees before him, cupping his face in her hands. I was never waiting for a ring, Alexander. I was waiting for you to believe in yourself again. He smiled through the ache in his legs, slipped the ring onto her finger, and kissed her hands. For the first time since the accident, he felt whole. The weeks that followed the showdown transformed the Lancaster estate into something entirely new. The halls that once echoed with silence now hummed with life. Staff who had once avoided Rachel began to greet her with genuine warmth, their whispers shifting from skepticism to admiration. She moved with quiet grace through every room, no longer the outsider nurse, but the woman who had stood at Alexander's side when the world doubted him most. Outside the estate, news spread like wildfire. The story of the crippled billionaire who stood again and the nurse who had helped him reclaim his empire filled headlines. Some outlets called it a fairy tale, others a scandal. But to those who watched closely, it was a testament of resilience. Invitations poured in for interviews, galas, and charity events, yet Alexander accepted only a handful. His focus was no longer on appearances, but on rebuilding with purpose. Together, he and Rachel founded the Moore Lancaster Foundation, aimed at funding medical care for women discarded by families and corporations. Rachel threw herself into the work designing programs that gave women skills counseling and, above all, dignity. At the first center's opening in Boston's South End, Rachel stood at the podium in a simple cream dress, her voice steady as she addressed the crowd. "I was once told I was nothing," she said, her eyes sweeping the audience, "that I had no place at the table. But today I stand here not because of wealth, not because of status, but because someone chose to believe my voice mattered. This foundation is for every woman who has been silenced, dismissed, or sold. You are not invisible. You are not forgotten." Applause thundered, and Alexander, seated in the front row with his cane by his side, rose slowly to his feet. Cameras flashed as he joined her on stage, lacing his fingers with hers. He whispered into her ear for only her to hear, "You shined so brightly I could go blind." Rachel's eyes glistened as she turned slightly. "Good. Then let the world see." Their kiss on stage, brief yet certain, sent the audience into a standing ovation. Back at the estate that evening, lanterns lit the garden, where Rachel had insisted they host a small gathering for the staff. She wore a silk robe, her hair loose, and walked barefoot on the grass. Alexander sat beneath the fairy lights strung through the trees, watching her with a softness that melted the last of his defenses. When she joined him, he reached into his pocket and pulled out a second velvet box. Her brows lifted as she opened it to reveal another ring more ornate than the first, engraved with the words, "By choice, not by force." Her breath caught. "You already gave me one," she whispered. He smiled faintly. "That was a promise. This is forever." She nodded, tears slipping down her cheeks. "Yes," she whispered, her voice breaking. "Yes." He slid the ring onto her finger, then drew her into his arms. Under the glow of fairy lights, they sealed not just a vow, but a future. Weeks later, they chose a rooftop wedding at sunset, keeping it private and intimate. White orchids twisted around golden arches, and the Boston skyline shimmered in the distance. Rachel walked toward him in a satin gown, her steps barefoot by his request. Alexander waited, standing tall, cane in hand, but steady, his eyes never leaving hers. When she reached him, the officiant began, but Alexander did not wait. He took her hands, his voice rich with emotion. "I knew the moment you challenged me, when everyone else stayed silent, that you were different. You did not fix me. You saw me, and because of you, I see myself again." Rachel's tears spilled freely as she answered, "I thought I was unwanted, forgotten, but you made me feel chosen, not because you needed me, but because you wanted me. I am not your nurse, Alexander. I am your home." They exchanged rings, their fingers trembling as they slipped them into place. When their lips met, the guests rose in applause, some wiping away tears. It was not a kiss of spectacle, but of certainty, the quiet promise of two souls who had endured the storm and chosen love in its aftermath. That night, the reception glowed with string lights, soft jazz and laughter that spilled across the rooftop. Guests toasted, danced, and captured photos that would later flood the media, despite the couple's wish for privacy. Yet Alexander and Rachel remained tucked in their own orbit, whispering to each other, smiling as though the world belonged only to them. Hours later, they returned to the mansion. In their bedroom, rose petals scattered across the bed, candles flickering in soft rhythm. Alexander sat on the edge of the bed, his tie undone, his eyes tender. Rachel stepped out of her shoes, her gown trailing behind her, and joined him. She teased lightly, "No speeches tonight." He chuckled, pulling her close. "Then let me show you instead." Their kiss was slow, unhurried, filled with laughter and soft sighs. It was not the desperate fire of their first night, but something deeper, steadier, a love built from broken pieces now made whole. When dawn arrived, light poured generously across the marble floors of Lancaster Hall. The estate no longer felt like a mausoleum. It felt alive. Laughter echoed from the garden where staff prepared for the second annual Moore Lancaster Gala. Rachel walked through the halls in a white silk jumpsuit, clipboard in hand, directing with quiet authority. Volunteers listened, vendors respected her, and even the wealthiest guests admired the calm power in her voice. "She does not need to raise her voice," someone whispered. "She is the voice," another replied. From the French windows, Alexander watched her dressed in a dark tuxedo. His COO stood beside him, chuckling. "She is more than your wife now, sir. She is a brand." Alexander's lips curved with pride, his voice low. "No, she is the reason." That evening, fireworks burst above the estate as Rachel stood on stage once again addressing the crowd. "This foundation was born from pain," she said, "but like anything real, it grew with love, not pity. I was once forgotten. Today I am seen not alone, but with all of you." Applause thundered. Alexander joined her, slipping his arm around her waist, whispering for her alone. "You have rebuilt me, Rachel." She leaned against him, smiling softly. "No, Alexander, we rebuilt each other." As the fireworks painted the sky, their eyes met steady and unyielding. In that moment, they were no longer a nurse and a billionaire, no longer broken and discarded. They were simply two souls who had chosen each other, proving that love beyond class, beyond pain, was the greatest healing of all.